Do you have to have taken drugs to actually be able to understand them? So as a drug scientist, this question or comment is brought up in basically every single one of my videos. So sometimes it's something like, which ones have you taken? And sometimes it's the more judgy, well, you obviously haven't done that one. I understand this desire. Like, first, it's just curiosity. But second, there's also this destigmatization. So if we talk about it, then maybe it won't be stigmatized as much. And then there's this idea that I might actually know more if I've taken the drug myself. So here are my thoughts as someone who has thought way too much about this. Like, I knew going into this TikTok that this is something that I would be asked. And so I had to come up with like a policy of what I felt comfortable with. So I feel comfortable talking openly about things like legal drugs. So I talk about how I have severe anxiety and I take anxiety medications. I talk about how I have migraines and take migraine medication. I talk about how I don't enjoy alcohol that much because I have migraines and it makes me feel a little bit terrible. And I've also talked about how I struggled with addiction to cigarettes for like a decade of my life and then finally quit. I'll talk about these examples when they matter. So, for example, I did a video on how to quit nicotine because as a person who literally studies nicotine and how to quit nicotine and who's done it myself, I have a lot of advice to give in that situation. And so I'll talk about the scientific version and I'll talk about how I did it and how other people do it too. I will never talk about anything that is illegal in terms of what I have tried or not. And that is because we do not currently live in a safe world to be able to openly discuss this. And problematically so. So it's not just legal consequences that you might face, but employment consequences. If I ever decided I wanted to go into politics to make a bigger difference or to just be annoyed at everything, I would have all of this used against me if I had ever admitted to anything in particular. If there was anything to admit to. And honestly, this annoys me. I want to destigmatize things too, but it is a dangerous world to talk about drugs out there. Like, we need to have examples of people who use all sorts of things and still have productive, functioning lives. Because all we see are the negative examples of people who have some sort of addiction. They've struggled with, for example, opioid use, and then it's taken over their entire life. Like, that is what we commonly see out there, and that is not the truth of drug use for a lot of people. I really admire people like Carl Hart. So he is a famous neuroscientist at Columbia University, just wrote a book, Drug Use for Grown-Ups, which I genuinely love, and I'm not just saying because one of my studies is cited in it. Genuinely fantastic book. He openly talks about how he uses H. And he's basically like, yeah, I am an outwardly successful human being who sometimes uses these drugs. But he is now famous enough that his platform allows for him to do that. And that's not true of most people. And that's not true in most societies. So will I openly talk about everything? No. Do I need to? Also no. So my personal examples would just be anecdotes, and that is not evidence. The reason that I started this is to give you the scientific evidence about drugs. Here's the thing, even if I hadn't done any drugs, I would still not be less qualified to talk about them. So I spent 5 years in education studying things like psychiatric illness and specifically drug abuse. So I did 3 years of undergraduate and then 5 years in a PhD. I have had multiple grants on drug addiction. I have published over 20 papers. I think I'm around 30 now. And I've spent more than 2 decades in the field. So who is more qualified to talk about drug addiction than a literal scientist who's been studying it for 2 decades? My personal experience on drugs, again, is just an anecdote, and not even a good anecdote. So for example, when I talk about alcohol, I don't like alcohol because I have migraines and it gives me migraines. So my perspective on alcohol is inherently flawed. My perspective on a lot of drugs also inherently flawed. As I mentioned, I have severe anxiety. So there are a lot of drugs that I probably would not even have a good experience with because of the anxiety that I have. I have a strong family history of schizophrenia, so I don't particularly want to take things that might trigger psychosis, that might be kind of laying dormant within me. And then there's a group of people who are like, oh, just try it once. Like, you just need to feel what the effects are. No, as somebody who had a ton of adverse childhood events, ACEs, that makes me at a 4-time increased risk of developing things like addiction. Now, that is not a guarantee by any means. So like if I tried something once, it doesn't mean that I'm guaranteed to try it again. But there is that increased likelihood. And I know what is best for me. So it's actually decently insulting for people to be like, oh, no, you just need to try them. Obviously, otherwise you can't talk about them. Like, I get the desire. You want somebody to have tried it so that they can actually know what the effects are and they can speak from a personal experience. But you don't need personal experience to be able to talk about things like the science. Science is kind of the opposite of personal experience for a reason, because you cannot be objective if you are only speaking from your own personal experience. I am well qualified to be an expert, probably more qualified than most people out there on TikTok are to talk about drugs. Does that mean that I need to have tried all of them? No. And I understand the desire to destigmatize. I also want to destigmatize as much as utterly possible. We need, though, an unbiased source of information, which is what I'm trying to provide. I waited for years to make this TikTok because I didn't want to be the center of attention here, but I want to make sure people get the information that they need to know. If I focus things on my hypothetical drug use, I'm just focusing them back on the anecdotes that you don't need. You need the science. And that's what I'm here for. So feel free to guess which drugs I have tried and which drugs I have not tried. I try to make it not as obvious as possible. It's a mystery, and that is completely fine for it to be a mystery because all you need to hear from me is the science.